Welcome to this Vital Health podcast from the ISPOR conference in Glasgow, Scotland. I'm Duane Schulthess, the CEO of Vital Transformation, and I'm very pleased to be talking to two experts on the difference between accelerated approvals, real-world evidence, and overall survival. I'm very pleased to be here with Steffen Thirstrup, the Chief Medical Officer of the European Medicines Agency. Steffen, it's great to see you. How are you doing?
Thank you. I'm doing well. Thank you.
Thank you for being with us. And I'm also joined by my old friend Richard Bergstrom, former head of FPA, now at IQVIA, head of policy. Hello, Richard. How are you doing, my friend?
I'm good, Duane. Good to see you.
Great to see you guys, too. Thank you for being here. So we're at ISPOR. Obviously, a lot of the talk here about evidence and evidence requirements. Steffen, you used to work at a national level in Denmark. You worked for the agency. Now you're the Chief Medical Officer of EMA. How do those things compare?
It's definitely two different types of job. Working at the Danish agency, I was mainly either the head of licensing or the Danish CHMP member at EMA, so that was very much into procedures and approval processes and engaging with companies. At EMA, I have a more outward-facing activity, like sitting here today together with you, giving interviews, being on the opening panel this morning here at ISPO, talking about patient experience data. But then, of course, having my prior knowledge is important in my job at EMA also, because, as you know, we have a ongoing revision of the pharma legislation. How do we actually implement this, and how can we use experiences like mine to reshape the way we are going to work moving forward?
Say, Richard, you as well. You used to work for the Sweden agency more on the commercial side. Now you're working, you've worked at FPA on a pan-national level with all the member states. Now you're at IQVIA working on the data. How do you see that comparison between the requirements at the member state level and at the pan-European level?
So first we see with the launch this year of the joint clinical assessments under the HTA regulation, and that's a big step. Okay, so this has really moved up. It's become institutionalized, and we're in a much better place today than we were 20 years ago when this all started with HTA.
Now, picking up on that, if we look at the difference of those requirements, what are the differences that are required between an HTA assessment and a regulatory assessment? What are those challenges that we have, that tension, Steffen? How do those operate?
For regulatory decision making, it's a benefit risk decision, taking all the issues related to pricing, reimbursement out of the equation. So does this product provide more benefits than risks? How can we manage those risks to still keep the balance positively? When we come to the HTA, it's more comparative assessment. So what are the added benefits compared to what's already being used or available to patients with a certain conditions? And then, of course, the health economics, and that's more, how do we get most healthcare for the dollar?
Yeah.
Or the euro, I guess.
or both. So, Richard, from your perspective, you were always an advocate for having the HTA closer to the decision at EMA. You wanted those things more closely associated.
I even wanted it in that building.
Which was the old building in London, which is now in Amsterdam.
In the second building in London, there was even a whole floor, I was told, with space to expand. And actually, the industry, FPA, we were not against that idea, because there would be a lot of efficiencies. And if you look at the country level, many of the HTA agencies are co-located with their regulators, even in the same entity.
This is something that we did. We went back and looked at what was happening before the centralized procedure was put in place in 2003 in the regulation. Sweden, under mutual recognition, I remember Zocor, one of the first statins for high blood pressure, was approved. I think the Swedes had the first approval, and it was 5-7 years before FDA. It was some crazy number. I mean, really hugely fast. So you saw these very quick approvals, but then you would see these troughs where you'd see these long delays through mutual recognition. You probably remember this in Denmark too, where you'd have these very, very quick approvals. What you've seen now since is it's almost like a Six Sigma curve. The variance has basically gone down, and now you just see a general level of delay until after FDA approval. Steffen, from your perspective, do you think there was a benefit to having these very rapid approvals and this sort of having this ability to do so at the member state level?
Agility in terms of approval is something we need, and it's also high on the agenda. You can also see the proposals in the pharma legislation focus on being more agile, stimulating innovation. I'm sure the applications we see nowadays are much more complex, much more heavy in data, so it also requires more time for the assessors to look at it. It's always been easier to make up your opinion as a single member state as opposed to doing it in a quorum of 27 member states. And the collaboration in Europe is on one hand a very beautiful thing. It's good to see how member states can work together and make common decisions, so these products get available not only for the Swedes or the Danes, but also for everybody. But that comes with a price, because collaborating takes a little bit more time.
So indeed, I was actually working at the Swedish agency then. I was much younger than now, less grey hair.
All of us, I think, are grey hair, yeah.
The agency decided, Kjell Strandberg was the director general then, he said, listen, we need to go for this. We had, of course, surrogate data. We had on lipids, cholesterol, and we had some early readout from a big Scandinavian study called 4S. And they decided to go for it, or we decided to go for it. And I just wonder, if you go back now, and I'm sure that maybe some academics that are here have done that work, how many people had a cardiovascular event or died even because of late access to these statins?
Sure.
I was working at the agency. I was sort of seconding the head of the agency with paperwork and organization. And we wanted to get this approved. And then we teed this up. There was a bit of skepticism in the Swedish sort of medical society about cholesterol, and it's all, what's that surrogate? It's all made up, and the industry came up with this, which we didn't believe it. We didn't agree with. But anyhow, what we did was this. We organized with cholesterol testing for our board. So this was before the EU, so we had our own CHMP. And that board, we had cholesterol testing just after lunch. And then after lunch, we had the decision. And one guy who was actually the lawyer, chief lawyer, he had such high cholesterol levels that they told him that right after this meeting you have to come down to the clinic. All approved. All approved.
Well, that's observational data, Richard.
Yeah. No, but nevertheless, it's a great case study for believing innovation, let it in, and then get rid of it if it's not delivering.
This is a really important point, and this gets to a lot of the topic that we're having here at ISPOR right now, which is the use of surrogate endpoints, the validity of the accelerated conditional approval. I mean, there is a lot of controversy around this right now. Let's just take a very anodyne question. Stefan, do you think we need a conditional or an accelerated approval? Does it have value?
Absolutely. I would say more value to the conditional approval than the accelerated approval. I think the accelerated approval is, we're talking about companies maybe saving a couple of months in approval time.
Well, sometimes even years.
Yeah.
Yes.
But accelerated approval in Europe is not that faster than a full approval. But I think the conditional approval is important, because that allows for what Richard just described, to make approvals on early endpoints, surrogate endpoints, and then having confirmatory data coming down the route. The challenge for regulators is, of course, that when those confirmatory data comes and they read out negatively or not as positive as we had hoped for, then you have a product on the market with a license, although a conditional license. That's one thing. But you're also having patients being treated. And then just pulling the product off the market is actually very difficult. And I've been told from a legal perspective also very difficult. So then you need to do that balance. How do we maintain the product? Can we narrow down the indications where there may be an effect? And you've seen some of those conditional approval actually ending up being quite a struggle from a regulatory legal perspective to get out of. But I don't think those negative experiences should have an impact on us having the ability to do conditional approvals, because there are a lot of good examples.
We've done a lot of work on FDA with the U.S. Congress on this, and we see about 18 to 20% get pulled off eventually and don't meet the endpoints that were agreed in the clinical pathway agreement with the FDA. Richard, from your perspective, what do we need to do to make sure, okay, this didn't meet the goal? Do we need to make changes there to make sure that those things are withdrawn?
Well, the thing is also is about the average or the mean versus individual responses. Sure. So you may have individuals that are on this therapy and it actually works for them. Okay, maybe it's a bit placebo, but it doesn't matter. It works.
That's exactly the challenge.
It works for them, right? So I think we have this myth from a European side when we look at the United States. We think it's all a free market. First you launch day one, which you don't. Germany is actually the country in the world where you can launch day one. You may have to pay some money back.
After EMA approval.
Well, you have to have that, yes. And not all drugs get to Europe, which is another question.
And that's increasing, by the way, which we can get into.
That's increasing. Yes. We have a whole void on orphans, your favorite topic, on biosimilars as well, but for other reasons. But my point being that in the United States, we think it's all free, everybody can do what they want. No, the payers have absolute control of prescribing. You have step therapy, you have prior authorization. There's a lot of bureaucracies. I'm not suggesting we should introduce that. There's more discipline in the United States when it comes to outmoding, as they say, therapies that are not really the best anymore. And by the way, I think, Steffen, that when if I ask the question on efficacy and effectiveness, I think both regulators and payers / HTA, they ask exactly the same questions. They have the same needs. Whereas the the regulators look at risk benefit, as you said. For HTA and payers, it's place in therapy, I would call it. Okay, you can call it comparative effectiveness, but it's place in therapy. So something may not be really that good anymore. It's outmoded, but still it could have a role for some patients. So it stays there, but is not first line, second line, third line. So when it comes to these treatment protocols and regimens that you see, not only in oncology, but in all other areas, it's a role of the profession, I think, of the medical societies to then say, okay, guys, we're not going to put new patients on this medicine anymore because the evidence is not there. Doesn't mean we take it off.
No. I completely agree with you. It's up to the, we could call it the market, up to the clinicians to decide. We have this opportunity, we have these products. Well, the confirmatory data did not really show what we expected, but that's the average data. There will still be patients who benefit. Maybe we should not put new patients on this product or only very selected patients on these products. But it's up to the prescribers and, well, to some certain extent also the payers to decide where you, because that's where you, that is how I see things. We, EMA, we issue a marketing authorization. That's the driver's license. You can put your product on the market, you're allowed to be there. But where that product is going to be used and who is going to pay for it, to what extent, that's the HTA and the scientific societies that decides how we make the tools available.
But you two both make a very interesting point, which is even when we don't have broad effectiveness data that shows ubiquity over the whole heterogeneous population, we do often see outliers and subsegments that do respond. Is there a mechanism now to say, okay, with this subpopulation, we can redefine the label? I mean, are we doing that now, and should we do more of it?
We are doing that now, I think both at the time of approval, where companies actually are struggling to find the right wording of the indication. And the problem is many times that these analyses are post hoc.
And they're also difficult.
And they're difficult. Yeah. And of course, then the hardliner statistician will come and tell us these are post hoc. You need to confirm what you found here. And that's, of course, another challenge. But and maybe we're going to be better at that, include that in part of our drug development process, that we think about different subgroups that potentially could have a bigger benefit.
You know, Richard, what we're talking about now, a lot of these evidence questions and how we're subsegmenting populations and the statistical challenges here. You and I started working together, 14 years ago, when adaptive licensing, adaptive pathways, MAPS, medicines, adaptive pathways to patients, was all the discussion. It sure sounds like more and more, a lot of these discussions are becoming quite similar to a lot of the debates and discussions we were having around adaptive licensing. Why do you think adaptive licenses were not adopted more broadly?
Well, first, what's in a name? You can put a name on something. Whether we call this adaptive license, that caused a lot of concern.
It caused a lot of controversy.
And particularly if industry was for it.
Yes.
Then people were worried. It's always like that. I should never propose anything.
If industry likes this, it can't be good.
No, it's something like that. But nevertheless, it's the same thing as some of these new regulatory tools that I hope we can get into, proposed now in the new pharma package, like platform approvals, sandboxing. So I hear payers being very skeptical and think, oh, surely this is something industry invented. Even if we don't call this now adaptive licensing, it's the reality of the drug development program which tells you whether it was adaptive or not, okay?
Yeah.
And here I see we still have a lot to do. And I've been somewhat critical of, the early days now of the HTA regulation and the joint clinical assessments. Where is the advice? It was supposed to be joint advice on everything. Is that happening?
Not to the extent that we wanted to see.
No. Whereas I know in Germany I was told that IQVIA, which is a sort of coordinating committee in the German system, they have more than 130 advice sessions every year with drug developers. Why don't we have that? How many scientific advice sessions do you have at the EMA these days? What's the statistics? I should have checked that. But
Close to 1,000, so 800 is, I think 800 is the figure I go with there.
and that's when you conceive your development program.
Sure.
Whether you put a label on it, say this is adaptive or not. I think there is an openness from also from the HTA community to rebalance some of the evidence requirements. When do you do things? And in a way, I've been thinking that when I started working on these things from a policy perspective, it's now more than 20 years ago, industry embraced the need to accept that you needed to do some HTA or comparative effectiveness assessment at the time of launch. Before that, the thinking was that HTA is something you do a few years into the market.
Yeah.
And we somehow had to accept the industry played along, and it took a very long time, but now we have this HTA regulation. But I'm thinking more and more that it's back to the beginning.
Yeah.
Guys, this is now where, we need to say, with real world evidence experience, and we've learned so much, and we have much better access to the data today, and we understand the warts and all, the pitfalls of the data, completeness and quality and everything. So I think you can conceive in a much better way a complete HTA readout years into the market. But then you should design that earlier on. And the regulators should help, because you're strong on methodology and the Darwin project, for instance, which is run by the EMA, IQVIA is involved in that. I think we need to really get going on these advice sessions to achieve the adaptive pathway, Duane, even if we don't use that term.
Yeah, if we're calling it ERIC or whatever we want to call it.
But it's I was attending the ISPOR HTA roundtable yesterday, and exactly the same thing came up. So what happened to adaptive licensing? Well, it was somehow abandoned for many reasons, as you gave here. But we're actually going back now, discussing using real-world data, generating real-world evidence, to do what was behind the idea of adaptive licensing, gradually approving. And maybe the time when this was brought up a decade or more ago, time was not ripe. There were concerns around, also for patients, are we bringing products to the market that haven't been investigated to the extent needed, and are real-life patients then suddenly becoming guinea pigs, as opposed to those patients who go into a clinical trial? Are we doing real-world clinical trials? We have a much more better understanding of early endpoints and biomarkers, that we could license product, we could give them a conditional approval, we could bring them to the market with a commitment of the developer, in collaboration with EMA, for that matter, and the STA bodies, to generate post-licensing real-world data that then could inform both the regulatory decision and the STA decision, and maybe having an opportunity to modulate the STA decision along the way.
Well, it's funny. The big joke is you run a phase 2 trial, you have 100 patients in the phase 2 trial, you have a 60% response rate. You run a phase 3 trial, you have 1,000 patients in the phase 3 trial, and you have a 60% response rate. It's like fundamentally the evidence doesn't necessarily change. What you're picking up is safety and efficacy data, often on the back end related to subsegmentations. One of the challenges that always came with adaptive licensing, at least what we were hearing, was the legal requirements around the ability to have more regulatory flexibility in the member states. A lot of the countries are like, well, we just can't do this, where our hands are sort of tied with what we can do from a regulatory approach to have more flexibility. Steffen, from your perch now as CMO, Chief Medical Officer of the EMA, are we seeing that this flexibility has been built in now? Do we have more flexibility than we did a decade ago when Richard and I were working on this?
I believe that the HTA regulation, we're only 10 months in its working, but that the HTA regulation will create a common understanding, or at least a foundation for the member states to make their own decision on pricing and reimbursement. And the openness of the HTA people, at least what I heard yesterday from the roundtable, to consider real-world data, real-world evidence as part of the HTA decision is much, much bigger today as compared to what it was even just 5 years ago.
Richard, from your perspective, are we using real-world evidence enough in Europe compared to some of the markets for which IQVIA is currently?
No, I think we do more of real-world data in Europe than elsewhere, that I think. But certainly not enough.
Yeah.
And this is why this early advice is so important. And there's some methodological tools as well, which we haven't really deployed, and I'm really into this these days. randomized real-world use. Take the TNF-alpha agents when they came in RA, for instance. So we had, I live in Switzerland now, but I'm still, Sweden is the country I know best, as we say. Fantastic registry with essentially all patients that get these agents, they're in a registry, okay? What if we randomize the introduction? That would, from a methodology perspective, greatly enhance the value of that information.
I think there's been done some studies in Denmark with high-dose influenza vaccine, where you actually invited elderly people and randomized them based on
if they had the vaccine.
And you randomized them, and then you did the study in the registers.
So I think this is the way, and of course you can't force companies. I mean, take now the obesity agents. I mean, it's very competitive, extremely competitive. Yeah, but there's still ways, I think, of introducing some better methodology in the real world practice, and you can extract information which regulators and payers can make decisions on later on.
We're currently working on a real world registry study where we're looking at chronic kidney disease, and we've extracted a cohort of several thousand patients, and then we're looking at a subsegment that have just randomly drifted into GLP-1s, where we're looking at the obesity drugs, and we're starting to determine if we have a segmentation there. Now, this wasn't prescribed specifically for chronic kidney disease. There's no label for that. But what's interesting is some of them have other comorbidities where they have GLP-1s. Now, we're not published yet. We're in the process of that. But we are starting to be able to make some statistical validation of the fact, hey, these are having an impact on chronic kidney disease.
Well, they seem to be having an effect on many things.
Absolutely.
But this is also an interesting case study live right now, is the fact that these obesity agents come in, primarily private market, or I call it a consumer market these days, okay, which may also impact on behavior because it costs money. But you see all this experimentation. And I think that's why I think it's so good, EMA, you have this patient experience consultation. It's still open, or was it closed now?
It's open until the end of January.
Okay, so guys, you still have time.
But I mean,
but this is, what's in the name. But still, I think it's very important because we talked about patient-reported outcomes, and that sounds very reporting outcomes, it's endpoints and so on.
Yeah.
But the experience is much broader. And we know very well that many of these people that take today GLP-1s, I didn't even use the word patient because you can argue, they all actually view themselves as patients?
We are all potential patients.
We are all potential.
Eventually we will all be patients.
Eventually we'll all be dead, as King said.
Yeah.
But my point being that there's all this experimentation going on needs to be somehow captured. So I think a framework for these people that take them today, they may not get the advice from their physician. They may get the advice on TikTok.
Yeah.
Where you see on YouTube, where you see how you play with the series or
that could make me concerned. But
I see your twitching.
Yeah, and I think there's another dimension I don't think we need to discuss here. But some of those products are not licensed products. That's another problem.
Yeah. There's a lot of counterfeits.
If you get the advice on TikTok, and the product you get is not prescribed by your doctor, then you're running a risk yourself, not with the TikTok advice maybe, but the product you are about to inject. No, coming back to the patient experience data, we have this guidance out, and exactly we want to move the patient experience beyond patient-reported outcomes. And for us, patient experience data are data from patients that have not been somehow analyzed or processed by healthcare professional or an AI tool or whatever. These are, well, not raw data in the classical sense, but unadulterated data from patient experience. So we are very keen on bringing them on board. The challenge that was also brought up this morning in the opening panel here is the healthcare systems are currently not in a systematic way capturing patient experience data, and if they are, they don't capture it and put it in the healthcare records like they put the blood pressure, the weight, the serum creatinine and so forth. And maybe some of them are in free text, and we could do some text mining, of course. But if we are to move to a stage, and you mentioned the European health data space yourself, where we can use those data to generate real-world evidence, it would be nice if the healthcare systems were also capturing patient experience data in a systematic manner.
No, but I think that's a very good recognition. So I was one of those, not only in the industry, but maybe from this community as well, who were very excited about real-world evidence and even promoting Of course, we're promoting value-based pricing. That is that the cost of a medicine is not due to development costs or the cost of manufacturing. We all know that. I think we're beyond that point. It reflects the value to society. Okay, the industry and others were on this path promoting outcome-based contracting and paying for results. But I must say, looking back, it was slightly naive, because all the companies came and said, "Oh, we want to do this now. This is the new thing, outcome-based contracting. We want to track the performance." So you will sign a contract that says, you track each patient, and if you don't get the same effectiveness as in your phase 3 trials, you will get money back. Okay, so did that work? No, it didn't work. And primarily it didn't work because the data wasn't there and it was not complete. So clinical trials, we have people, and at IQVIA we're big in clinical trials, we've got an army of people that go out chase data, because you need to make sure that whatever it has to be in the health record, because otherwise pharma companies can't use it in a submission, and there will be inspectors from the FDA and the EMA come and check whether the source data verification, we call it. So, but you don't have that in everyday clinical practice.
No.
So, and then in between you have different types of registries, right? So I think we have a much better understanding now of what is doable. So if you want to do something that's outcomes based, it has to be really simple. It has to be very high level, has to be kind of population health level outcome agreement.
One of the challenges, though, when we're looking for these alternative endpoints, surrogate endpoints, biomarker-based endpoints, there's a lot of pushback against these right now, particularly at the HTA level. We're seeing this. And obviously, a lot of the pipeline and portfolio has been oncology. How do we deal with the fact that there appears to be a push to move to OS, overall survival, away from a lot of these surrogate endpoints and alternative endpoints, which have provided access for a lot of these oncology products? Well, I mean, let's not kid ourselves. Some of these oncology treatments, these are very, very narrow. If we look at acute lymphoblastic leukemia, you're talking 2,000-3,000 patients a year. That's max. That's the total global population. It's going to be very, very difficult to get OS data, overall survival data. I guess from your perspective as a regulator, are you concerned about this questioning of alternative endpoints that's starting to creep into the debate?
EMA may, by some industries, be perceived as quite conservative in its willingness to accept surrogate endpoints. We set the bar a little bit higher than the FDA. We want them to be validated endpoints, and not all of them may be validated. So maybe we are somewhere in between the FDA and the payers, as you described them. I would be concerned if we move entirely toward overall survival. We of course like overall survival, but we don't need overall survival for a conditional approval. We can approve on surrogate endpoints, and we got to make sure that it turns into something relevant for patient. And survival is of course relevant for patient, but coming back to the patient experience data, there are a lot of other things that are important for patients who have a lethal condition that we know we are not going to cure, but we may be able to prolong the time you have left here, and what are the quality of life here, what is your experience here. So I think it's important, and I'm not sure whether European payers will continue to move to become hardliners only wanting overall survival. I don't hope so.
Richard, what's your perspective on this?
We reflect too little on the past. And maybe because I'm getting older, so I tell all these stories about how it was back in the days. But, would you call today high blood pressure a surrogate? Would you call high cholesterol a surrogate?
Yeah, they are validated.
They're validated, and the question is then, when do you do that validation? So
what do you need to
when was a time in history that we could actually say, yes, definitely, it's worth to lower high blood pressure, it's worth to lower cholesterol? At what time was that? It was certainly not at the time of approval.
It was after you guys approved Zocor. That I can guarantee.
My other example I use these days is hepatitis C, where we go out and we treat people that have endemic hep C. I mean, there's no sign of cirrhosis, there's no sign of it getting any cancer or anything or needing transplantation. And still, it's like obvious for everybody. It's obviously interesting, I keep saying.
It's HIV and virus load. Yeah, viral load is the same.
Yeah.
But you can take the anti-osteoporotic medicines. We have to go a very long way until we didn't want fracture data any longer. So it took a long time. We continued to approve products on BMD, and then we said to the company, a post-authorization committee needs to provide fracture data.
I remember I had to do one of these bridging studies on a biphosphonate, where you had to go from one formulation to another, and we had to do a fracture study because BMI wasn't accepted. Hopefully we moved on from that.
We moved on, but it's an interesting question, and I don't have the answer, but maybe it could be a fun study to do, to see, pick up different validated surrogate endpoints of today, and then look back and see how long time did it take, when did we suddenly agree that this is a validated endpoint, and how many studies did it take, how many patients. My gut feeling is that that time span is getting smaller and smaller, because today we will sometimes ask companies to do a dedicated validation trial, so to speak.
And this is exactly the conversation that we need to have between regulators and the payer and HTA community early on, to say, when is it that it's reasonable to expect that kind of validation. And then you build the plan, and you can have a new approach even with the randomization in everyday clinical practice on. But that dialogue is not there yet.
If we look at the current situation right now, we have the pharma legislation, we have things, we have a lot of questions about the use of the conditional approval. If you could make one recommendation now, given everything that's just occurred, the joint HTA assessment, if you had the ability to make one change today, right now, that could change an implementation of healthcare in 3 to 5 years, what would it be? Stefan, I'll start with you. What would you like?
Oh, that could be many things. I think talking in ISPO and all the focus on patient experience data, I think the move forward to getting a better understanding on how we can use patient experience data to support our decision making and make even better use of real world data, I think that would be a big step forward.
Richard, same question to you. If we had one opportunity to implement something and you could do it between now and tomorrow, what would you want to have the biggest impact in the next 3 years?
Well, here in Europe we have a unique opportunity with the European health data space coming. And I keep saying, when I looking back at the setting up the European Medicines Agency, that was a small project. Well, it was huge then, we moved from national authorization. We still have the workforce out in the countries. That's another myth, by the way. Most people think that all the people sit at the EMA. No, they're out in the countries. It's a strong workforce in Denmark, strong workforce in Sweden, elsewhere. But the European health data space is enormous. And just because it's so big, people don't see it. What's the saying in English? You can't see the forest for all the trees.
For the trees, yeah.
So this is it. You somehow need to disaggregate it and look at the components. There's one component for primary use, which is for everyday healthcare. And I think that's what you talk about, Stefan. If you can tap into that, there will be something called My Health at EU, which will be your portal, which should be interoperable all over Europe. Just think about that for a second. And then on the secondary use side, there's a very ambitious program with unlocking data sets. Guess what? The UK is now copying this. They don't say they're copying it, but I'm allowed to say this. I mean, actually, England is copying it. Scotland is already doing it, I think, in Scotland now. Health Data Research Service, HDRS. It was even in the Make America Healthy Again. Now we got into that whole bucket of issues. In that plan, there's a whole section on real-world evidence, where they realized that, one way also to speed things up, and I mean, Makari, the FDA commissioner, is talking a lot about how can it take 10 years to develop a medicine, guys? We have to fix this.
Marty McCary is talking about an adaptive license in many ways. He's talking about it for conditional.
But on the real-world evidence side, Europe we are ahead, okay? So we are right now in the implementation phase. It's going to roll out over the next, 4 to 5 years, 3 to 5 years. But we really need to make that work, because it all can give Europe an edge in this world of competitiveness.
Yeah. If we could do that overnight for tomorrow, it would be great.
Well, I think it'll be
or maybe next week.
Okay, we'll give you a month.
I'm with you on that.
Stefan, thank you very much for your time. Richard, it's always a pleasure. Great to see you, my
Pleasure.
friend. Thanks, gentlemen. Have a good day. This podcast was supported by Merck Sharp & Dahm as part of the APACE project in collaboration with GlaxoSmithKline and AstraZeneca. Video by Ben Harbour. Editing by Caden Drake. The Vital Health Podcast is a production of Vital Transformation LLC, copyright 2025.